Thank you for tuning in today and welcome back to another episode of The Source. I'm your host, Zain Raza. Before I start this interview, I would like to remind you to support our channel by joining our alternative platforms on Rumble and Telegram. YouTube, which is owned by Google, can shadow ban and censor us at any time, and if that day ever comes, we won't be able to reach you even with an announcement. Furthermore, if you'd like to support our journalism going forward, please donate to us today. We don't take any money from corporations or governments and only depend on you to continue our journalism. You will find the links to all of our donation platforms as well as alternative social media channels in the description of this video. Today, I'll be talking to retired Army Colonel who served in the US Army for 31 years, Lawrence Wilkerson. Lawrence Wilkerson's last position in the US government was Chief of Staff of Secretary of State Colin Powell from 2002 to 2005. He's now a senior fellow at the Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Lawrence, welcome back to the show.
Good to be with you, Zane, especially to be back in Germany, so to speak.
On June 13th, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a surprise large-scale aerial assault on Iran targeting nuclear facilities and missile bases, reportedly killing senior Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders, nuclear scientists, along with approximately 639 Iranians, about 263 of whom have been estimated to be civilians, that include dozens of children, in strikes across Iran. In response, Iran fired hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones targeting major sites in Israel, including strategic military installations, Mossad facilities, as well as residential areas in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Beer Sheva. Although Israel's multi-layered air defense intercepted most of the threats, dozens penetrated, resulting in 24 Israeli fatalities, hundreds being injured, and damage to civil infrastructure, which includes Soroka Hospital. Israel reports of having destroyed around 120 Iranian missile launchers, about one-third of Iran's known stockpile, while maintaining air superiority using F-15s and F-35 jets. The conflict has triggered regional evacuations, suspended nuclear diplomacy, and sparked fears of wider escalation. Though the Strait of Hormuz remains open and global oil markets have stayed steady so far. Could you first comment on Israel's military operation and whether it's achieved its strategic objectives? And how do you evaluate Iran's response thus far?
Zane, I think this is a very complex situation right now. Let's start at the top and unravel it. First of all, this was a major act of aggression by Israel, no doubt about it. I realize that we have tossed away international law, we being the American empire predominantly, but Europe joining in the fray completely. We have discarded the rules-based order, as it were, that we constantly talked about and tried to get our allies and others to help us protect. We have destroyed it. There's nothing left. There is no rule of law in the world, international or otherwise. It is all brute power now. So let's just get that out of the way, that this is a war of aggression. Moreover, it's a war more like the one that Yamamoto conducted against Pearl Harbor in 1941 and Saddam Hussein conducted against Kuwait later, 1990, as I recall. And to be very specific, it's like the war that the United States, the war of aggression, the unlawful war, according to the UN and international law, that the United States conducted against Iraq in 2003. So now that we've got that out of the way and that Israel is a first class, not only for the genocide it's conducting in Gaza, the bombing it's done in Lebanon, and the infringement on Syrian territory that it's now making unlawfully, it is a first-rate war criminal. So we have a war criminal that is pounding Iran. And we have Iran responding, and I'm hearing news this morning that tells me their response is calibrated, mostly accurate, is devastating, that Israel is essentially lying about the devastation. They can't lie. I've got videos of it, but they are constraining their own population. They're constraining them from leaving the country, for example. A lot of wealthy Israelis were trying to leave by craft across, boats, pleasure boats and other things across the Mediterranean. They're restraining them from going, even though these are the richest Israelis who can afford these boats. And they have closed the borders and they've closed all manner of communication. They had done that pretty much with regard to Gaza, but now they've closed it completely so that nothing can come out of the truth. And yet these videos are coming out. I'm seeing these videos. I have no idea who's taking them. Perhaps the 7 million of the 14 million in Israel proper are Palestinian or Arab. So, and they're treated like fourth and fifth class citizens. So they may be taking these videos and sending them out. All to say that this is a standoff right now, and Israel is in dire trouble. So, what is the United States going to do? That is the question of the hour, I think. And it's not just the United States, it's the United States in terms of major military force, but England and other countries are involved in it. MI6 is involved in it heavily, as is CIA. So we're waiting, almost with bated breath, if you will, to see what this mercurial character, this carnival clown, Donald Trump, will do, knowing full well that it's not Donald Trump making the decisions. It's the billionaires behind him who constitute what is loosely called the deep state, but certainly exists. And we don't even know the names of most of them. A third of them are Jewish American or dual citizen, at least billionaires. And I'm told there are at least 100 behind him in much of the effort that he's engaged in right now, both domestically and internationally. It's a very scary thing. Domestically, it's a very scary thing. But right now, we're looking at the prospect of, let's say, it devolves to where Israel feels, and Netanyahu would not need much to feel this way, existentially threatened. I'm very fearful that the Samson option might be exercised, and that, for your listeners that don't know, is Israel using one or more of its nuclear weapons on Iran. Netanyahu even had the audacity, I don't know if you saw this, yesterday or the day before, to suggest that there was another state in the world that needed regime change, assuming he means that the United States needed to attack this country. It's Pakistan, of course, and insinuating that any Muslim country, any Islamic country with a nuclear weapon is anathema and needs to be taken out by the empire. I find this to be disgusting, as well as incredibly dangerous to be doing that as a head of state, even though he's a maniacal head of state and a genocider. But still, the United States listens to him, apparently. So this is a dangerous time, an extremely dangerous time. We have an arc of crisis going now from the northern flank of NATO, where certain countries like Norway are challenging the Russians on the high seas. Very dangerous thing to do, as we've seen as one Russian fighter craft pretty much got the Norwegians off. But they're trying to challenge Russia on the high seas because they think Russia is shipping oil and other products that it needs, clandestinely, if you will. But it's international waters they're challenging them in, even though the shelves and the economic zones and so forth of these countries pretty much consume the Baltic Sea. That's nonsense. The law of the sea treaty says innocent passage takes precedence, and for Russian purposes, this is innocent passage. So you've got that happening on the northern flank with these little pipsqueak countries that want to drag the United States into, because they wouldn't be doing it if they didn't think they had Article 5 in NATO, down through Ukraine, which Trump has now abandoned completely, apparently, and the Russians are just annihilating Ukraine now. I wouldn't be surprised to see Odessa fall. I wouldn't be surprised to see Kyiv either burning or fall. I wouldn't be surprised to see Zelensky's scalp on a telephone pole somewhere outside Kyiv. They've won so thoroughly now that there's hardly anything in their way to going further. And on down to the Levant, where we just described that situation. This is ripe for a regional, possibly even a global war. It reminds me of 1914. If you're familiar with Barbara Tuchman's phrase, the March of Folly, this is a march of folly par excellence, and the United States is leading it.
You've already mentioned this, but I would like to dive deeper into this issue of international law. Let's talk about the fundamental issues that are not being addressed adequately in the German media, which is A, Does Iran have a right to pursue nuclear weapons? And B, whether Israel's preemptive strike on Iranian nuclear facilities were internationally legally permissible? Across the German media and political landscape, it's routine to frame Iran's nuclear ambitions as illegitimate while depicting Israel's strike as fully justified. For example, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz recently emphasized a perspective in a ZDF interview at the G7 summit on June 17, stating, quote, "This is a dirty work that Israel is doing for all of us," unquote, and affirming Israel's right to defend itself against the Iranian, quote, "mullah regime," unquote. Could you provide your assessment on whether Iran has a right to develop nuclear deterrence and whether Israel's preemptive strike on nuclear sites align with legal doctrines of self-defense, or do they cross the line into unlawful aggression?
First of all, as Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence for the United States, pointed out to the Congress in March of this year, just a few months ago, Iran was judged by the intelligence community to be 2 to 3 years away from being able to weaponize, not enrich to 90%, but weaponize a missile that would carry a nuclear warhead accurately and effectively. I think that's right because when I had to deal with the AQ-Con network, when I was inside the government and had to deal with a number of countries who were seeking nuclear weapons or at least a threshold capability to have nuclear weapons like Japan has today. Oh, and by the way, no one's really talking about Japan, are they? No, because they're an ally of the empire. And no one's talking about Israel, who are members of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, not signatories to the Additional Protocol or the Safeguards Agreement or anything. Indeed, we don't even know they have nuclear weapons because they deny it, but they do because we gave them to them along with the French. So this is a really messed up soup of who's right and who's wrong, but there are some clear parameters. One is, as Tulsi Gabbard said to the Congress, probably 2 to 3 years. So at best, you could accuse Iran of being a threshold state with some time left, should they make a decision to go to a nuclear weapon. The second aspect of it that I think needs some clarification is what is the difference between being a threshold nuclear state and being a nuclear weapons possessing state? I think it's a huge difference. And I'll use Japan again as an example. I don't think that there's a great deal of fear in Northeast Asia of Japan as a nuclear armed state because everyone looks at Japan as having a sane and sober leadership in Tokyo. That could change, but it's been pretty persistent since World War II. So, and let's look at another example in that same region, Kim Jong-un in North Korea. Why is it we're not contesting Kim Jong-un? He has a weapon. And I think most intelligence analysts, including those in the West, MI6, Mossad, CIA, would conclude that were he threatened in some way, he would use it. And in fact, there has been speculation he might use it to prep a war on South Korea. I don't subscribe to that theory, but nonetheless, it is a possibility. Why isn't everyone talking about North Korea? They're not, because they do, in fact, possess a nuclear weapon and have exploded it to prove it, not once, but several times. So that tells the world, don't be Libya. Look what happened to Gaddafi. Be Kim Jong-un and North Korea. That's a big incentive for them to get a nuclear weapon. Who am I to tell a sovereign state that if they're in that kind of situation, they can't develop a nuclear weapon? Now, we seem to think in the empire that they can develop one if they're our buds, our friends, but they can't develop one if they have any kind of antagonisms with us. And now let's examine that a little bit. What kind of a threat does Iran present to the United States? Zero, I would say, absolutely zero. Some indirect threats, but we would have to cause those threats to materialize, like bombing Saudi Arabia, closing the Strait of Hormuz, although even that doesn't have the impact on the empire it used to because we lead the world now in production of petroleum. And there's another thing to throw into this situation. The more we cause the price of oil to go up, the better off we are to a certain extent, because it takes $50 to $60 a barrel to even make fracking, which is our major way of getting it in our country, economical. So we have to have that kind of oil. And let's look at Russia. People are saying, well, Russia will come to Iran's aid. And indeed, they may to a certain extent. But Russia wants oil prices to go up too, because that would make them even richer than they already are. So it's a very complicated situation. But back to Article 51, the one parameter that I kind of look at when we talk about wars. Under Article 51 of the UN Charter, the right to self-defense, the U.S. committed a war of aggression in 2003 against Iraq. Don't care that they had WMD. They didn't, but don't care. It's still a war of aggression for the same reasons we're talking about with regard to Iran. Now, was Israel's act under Article 51 starting with Gaza? That's a very difficult situation to describe, because if you check out international law closely, you will see that an occupying power, which Israel most certainly was and has been for some time, arguably since the 67 war, has responsibilities towards those whom it occupies. Well, Israel was not fulfilling those responsibilities. They were keeping Gazans in a place not much bigger than greater metro London, 2.5 million Gazans. They were keeping them in a concentration camp, an open air concentration camp. International law says people in that situation under an occupying power have a right to respond with military force or however they can. So all this business of October the 7th is tragic, to be sure, but under international law, those people had a right to attack their oppressor. We've just forgotten that. We forget all that. It's very convenient for us to forget all that. That said, even if it were justified under international law, even if Israel's response in Gaza were justified under international law, genocide is not. Starving people as an act of war is not. Israel is right now under the shadow of the Iran-Israel conflict, doubling and tripling down on the deaths in Gaza. They are killing people coming to eat. They are enticing them to come to the humanitarian aid that's being very carefully orchestrated by a company that Israel is heavily invested in. And then they are pounding them with aircraft and artillery and tanks, even killing them with tanks. So they're killing 50 to 70 Palestinians a day while all this is going on. This is an arch war criminal, Bibi Netanyahu, and Israel by extension, because consistent polls show 80% of the Jewish citizens of Israel, the some 6 to 7 million, decreasing majorly now as they evacuate the country, they approve of what Netanyahu is doing. So if you want to talk about justice in Martin Luther King Jr. terms, for example, Israel is getting what it deserves. And Iran has every leg to stand on to deliver that justice. It needs to stop, though. It needs to stop because, as I said, I fear Israel will sense some existential qualities to what's happening to it right now, eventually, particularly if the United States doesn't weigh in. And we'll be looking at exercise of the Samson option, which incidentally in 1973, Golda Meir, then Prime Minister of Israel, told a BBC reporter when he asked her that very question, would they use a nuclear weapon? She said, without blinking an eye, of course. Now, you could say that was for political reasons. She wanted everybody to think they would, but I don't trust that. I don't trust that at all. So we're in a very dangerous situation here. As I pointed out, all the way from the Baltic, where at any moment Russia could get irritated at some of those people and smack them, and that would be a smack of a NATO partner. And under Article 5, we're supposed to come to their assistance. all the way down to the southern end of the Persian Gulf, where we got this going on, and lots of things in between are percolating. Not least of which is this bloody-minded war in Ukraine, where Putin is just uh, he's won so much now that Clausewitz says war has its own dynamics day by day as it goes along, and you need to change your strategy sometimes day by day, week by week, month by month, because it does have a dynamic of its own. Well, that dynamic right now is very enticing to Putin. He could go much further. He could fulfill some of the things that people said stupidly that he wanted to do before actually go to war with NATO. I don't think he will, because that would certainly mean a nuclear exchange. But that's how dangerous this situation is in Ukraine. And if Ukraine wants anything left, particularly if it wants its port city of Odessa, the only access to the Black Sea it has left, if it wants it to remain under its sovereignty, it better make a deal pretty quickly. And the real guilty party here, Zain, is Donald Trump, because he's pushed himself away from it. And in many respects, he's the only person with the kind of stature and the military behind him to actually negotiate some sort of reasonable end to this conflict in Ukraine. More importantly than that, he and Putin both talked about the reason they need to restore some sort of positive relationship between Moscow and Washington is the nuclear weapons both of us have. In combination, somewhere around 11 and 12,000 nuclear warheads. That's a very dangerous situation, and we have no treaties whatsoever because, well, we have START, but it goes out in February, and I can't imagine Putin wanting to renew it with a duplicitous capital like Washington. But we need to get back into a treaty regime with these weapons, and we need to bring China, India, Pakistan, Israel, ultimately, all the nuclear weapon states into this regime, because we're at a very dangerous time right now. I had a talk with two people whose views I respect very much last night. They think, and they've been tracking this since the Cold War started, really, throughout the Cold War, throughout all the treaties, Open Skies Treaty, ABM Treaty, INF Treaty, Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty, all these treaties. They've tracked how they evolved and how we came to a point where we actually eliminated an entire class of nuclear weapons with the INF Treaty. Howell was very proud of that. He was part of that when he was National Security Advisor to Ronald Reagan, because they were the most dangerous weapons. And now we're back again. Look at the Oreshnik and other missiles that Moscow is raining down occasionally on Ukraine. These are all INF weapons that have conventional warheads on them, but they can very easily be equipped with nuclear warheads. So we're back in a very dangerous world that needs to be contained through at least a good, solid treaty regime. And we're not doing anything about it because we have, I hate to say this, but I've been on this earth 80 plus years, 50 of them in government. Excuse me just a minute. And I got to tell you, I have never seen globally such a crop of unwise, stupid, ignorant, gutless, I pick your adjective that's negative, leaders. We just have an array of leaders across the face of the earth that don't know what to do and are either kowtowing to the empire, Washington, or remaining aloof because they don't feel like they want to do anything. Just imagine Greta Thunberg's on an almost yacht-like ship in the Mediterranean in international waters. Now, there are all kinds of navies arrayed around the Mediterranean, just to mention a few: the Greek, the Italian, ours, the Russian even, the Turkish even. They didn't do a thing. International waters. An apprehension of people on a boat in international waters by an illegal criminal state called Israel. No one did anything. No one did a thing. I imagine a few ambassadors demarched a few capitals, but no one did anything. So that's where we are. We're at a point in the world where the empire runs amok and people either hide in their closets or join it. That's not a very safe world.
Talking about spineless leadership, President Trump has publicly kept the option open of launching US strikes on Iran's heavily fortified Fordo nuclear facility, located roughly 80 meters in US 260 feet underground, beyond the reach of Israeli air power. Only US B-2 stealth bombers equipped with GPU-57 massive ordnance penetrators potentially deployed from Diego Garcia base could effectively strike such a hardened target. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei has responded with a stark warning, stating that any US military intervention will result in irreparable damage to the United States. Analysts interpret this as a broader threat aimed at approximately 40,000 American troops stationed across military bases in the Middle East, including in Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iraq, Qatar, and more. Given this context, how viable is a US strike on Iranian nuclear facilities? And should a strike occur, do you believe Iran will follow through with its threat? And what would be the global repercussions if it did so?
This might be the most difficult and complex and explosive situation in all the ones I've just described, the way you have just pitched it. Because we are looking at Tehran that will have to make a decision, and then we're looking at a Washington that will have to make a decision. Both decisions will be tantamount to utter defeat. Defeat for Iran and defeat for the empire. No one will win. So let me back up and parse that a little bit for you. First of all, we are talking about B-2s with the huge bombs that they can carry going over Fordo and maybe some other places and dropping them. I've talked to experts. I know about how the North Koreans did what they did, and I know the North Koreans did a lot for the Iranians in the early years of the AQCON network. I know they taught them how to operate underground in a significant and safe way. They found the ground that was necessary to do that. Iran is big enough to have that kind of ground in it, just like North Korea. We didn't even know the North Koreans tested the first time because they were so deeply underground. All to say, these B-2 bombs are not going to get Iran's facilities that are deeply underground, period. They're not. That's going to be very frustrating for the empire if that's the lead attack. And then the second thing is bombs from U.S. warplanes, no matter how many they are, no matter how many times they fall, no matter how many people they kill, are not going to persuade a country of 90,000 people to do what we want them to do.
90 million.
Yes, just not going to happen. A country as big and populated as Iran. What bombing does, Zain, is intensify the hatred of the people upon whom the bombs are falling for you. You, the one dropping the bombs. That is such a lesson of the past 100 years that it's amazing these stupid people like Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz and lots of people in our Congress and apparently our president don't understand. That's not the way you convince people. Zain, we dropped more iron bombs on North Vietnam than we dropped on Germany in World War II. We still didn't persuade them. In fact, they won in the end. So what would unfold here? What would unfold is that, as you said, if Iran started attacking U.S. facilities in the region and Saudi facilities too, driving the price of oil up, Putin would cheer in Moscow, and we would be forced into mounting ground troops in Iran, an invasion. That is the unraveling of the American empire. I will guarantee you, take my oath on it, swear to it on the Bible. That's the unraveling of the American empire. So we're looking at a situation where if Donald Trump really jumps in with 10-pound feet, the empire's over. Now, if he goes in just a little bit, say drops the big bombs on Fordo or wherever, and fails, he'll probably say he didn't fail. He's learned from Netanyahu. You just lie. You say you succeeded when you didn't. And everybody believes you because you've closed down the media so they can't refute it, and you won't let anybody film or anything like that. So, I mean, this is, it has a medium place where it could stop with everyone badly bruised and Israel probably terminated as a state or a viable state. and the United States licking its wounds and trying to express to the world that it really isn't hurt. That's a middle road that it could extend to if people are even remotely smart and try to stop it. But I fear it'll go all the way. I fear we'll just watch it ratcheting up one step at a time. And Trump, of course, will be one of the ones turning the ratchet wrench. But again, it isn't Trump so much as the billionaires behind him. The billionaires who are neoconservatives, who hate Russia, who hate Iran, and who ultimately want to establish a technocratic state in America where a board of corporate people run the country. They'll get rid of Trump before they do that. But that's what they want. That's their ultimate goal, to establish an Elon Musk-like corporate board to run America.
To my last question, on the surface, Israel appears to be appearing as a geopolitical winner. Hezbollah's military capacity was significantly degraded by Israel and Lebanon in 2024 and 2025. In Gaza, Hamas has been severely weakened by Israel's ongoing military operation and siege. Furthermore, Israel has accelerated settlement expansion in the West Bank, and as of May 29, 2025, around 16,800 new housing units were approved, on track to exceed 50,000 for the year, roughly quadruple the total from 2024. Western leaders, many of whom had previously threatened sanctions against Israel over its inhumane conduct in Gaza, have been largely diverted their attention to Iran conflict, following Israel's long-range strikes. It seems that only Canada, New Zealand, UK, Australia, and Norway have proceeded sanctioning true Israeli far-right Israeli ministers Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich for inciting violence in the West Bank. Other states such as Germany have shifted the discourse away from Gaza and towards Iran. The only remaining counterforce, it seems now, is Iran, and Israel appears to be dismantling a significant portion of its missile infrastructure, having destroyed approximately 120 surface-to-surface missile launchers, which represent one-third of Iran's total known long-range capabilities, according to the IDF. Do you believe Israel is emerging as a clear geopolitical victor, potentially advancing what some analysts refer to as Project of Greater Israel? Or will its ongoing multi-front wars ultimately impose such enormous political, economic, and strategic cost that its current trajectory becomes increasingly unsustainable?
If you listen to my earlier answer, I think you know what I'm going to say. I suspect that Israel right now, first of all, Israel lies a lot. Their propaganda machine is just extraordinary, but it's composed principally of lies. And the chief liar, of course, is Netanyahu himself. So we're looking at a picture, if you're looking at the picture presented by that apparatus, that is absolutely false. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I don't think anyone knows, and I've been stunned at how badly we have aired how many Iranian missiles there are and where they are and the type and quality they are. We simply missed that badly, as did Israel, I think. I think there are quite a few left, and I think they're going to keep coming in. And Iran is not trying to conduct a war that, shall we say, terminates Israel in an instant. They learned a lot, I think, from the Iran-Iraq war, when they had the war of the cities, if you will. You remember that? When they were exchanging Scud missiles, far less accurate and less powerful. So they know how to do this sort of war. And they know how to make it look like, for example, that this or that is a ripe target when it isn't a target, and have the enemy, in this case Israel, or maybe the U.S. too, waste their weaponry. And they've implemented that now. They were caught off guard, no question. They were caught off guard by a Yamamoto type attack. I mean, the Japanese pretty much ripped the U.S. a new rear end at Pearl Harbor. Now, they didn't get the carriers, and that was a big error, not one that they could have rectified, but they didn't get the carriers because they were out at sea. But they did get a lot, and they put a real blow on the United States Pacific warfighting capability. That said, Yamamoto summed it up himself. I fear that we have attacked a sleeping tiger and filled it with a fearful resolve, which was precisely the truth. Yamamoto, as a captain, had been in the United States, and he'd seen the formidable power of the United States that was latent, and we had just been aroused, and he knew that power would now come against Japan. Well, the same thing pertains to a lesser degree with regard to Iran, I think. This is 90 million people. And people say, well, how did Israel get into Iran? Do you know how many miles of border Iran has? Do you know how many Israel has? Do you know, it's like London and Brazil. Iran has lots of trouble with its borders too. Azeris and you name it, the kind of people they have to deal with, especially on the borders next to Azerbaijan and Afghanistan and so forth. By the way, I heard this morning that they have cleaned up a whole lot of Afghans who they just needed money. They just needed money, and Israel offered them money. And so they comprised a lot of these people who sneaked these drones in and got the drones in position to fire on the air defenses and such. Iran has now policed them up. And I guess you can imagine what's probably going to happen to these Afghans. And there are others like that. But Iran has huge, long borders. And so getting into Iran is not any great achievement. Yeah, you could walk across the border. My son flew the borders during the Iraq War for the Iraqi Air Force. He was an advisor to the Iraqi Air Force out of Kirkuk. And he said, Dad, every night we would watch the borders, and there were no terrorists down there that we could see. But good Lord, how much trade went on, all of it illegal. You know, everything from oil to food illegally exchanged on those borders. That's the way that is. Very porous borders and very difficult to police. But now Iran is at war. Now Iran has a different motivation and a different cast, if you will, on what it has to do. So Israel's up against a formidable foe that will come to a draw with Israel, if not defeat them, if the war goes on and devolves to what it was in the Iran-Iraq war, just sending missiles back and forth at one another. That's when the United States has to make its decision. And I fear that decision will be made by the circus clown that's in charge with those billionaires behind him. And we'll wind up with a much different kind of war, one that sucks the empire in completely eventually and destroys it. Now, what do you think Russia and China are going to be doing while that's going on? Chortling, probably, feeling really good about their position in the world. Maybe, I don't know. Xi Jinping's got a real worry on right now, I think, about where the empire is headed and what it might do as it goes down. And I think the rest of the world is going to have that worry very shortly, too. Ricardo Alarcón, a Cuban in charge of the Cuban National Assembly, once said to me in a protocol house outside Havana, we know that El Coloso del Norte, the giant of the North, is in trouble. We know that, too, a dying elephant can thrash a lot of grass, and we don't want to be in that grass. And we're only 90 miles off Florida. So he laughed, took another shot of scotch and said, we know we could be in deep trouble even if El Coloso is going down. Well, the rest of the world should start worrying about that. Look at the United States now. We're without law. We are without compunction. We are without humility. We are without empathy. We're without sympathy. We're a beast. We sanction or bomb or both anyone we don't like. It is a very dangerous world right now, made dangerous significantly by Washington and its sure knowledge that power is shifting from it toward China and Russia. And Russia and China together are unbeatable, except with nuclear weapons. The problem with that is use of nuclear weapons in that regard destroys the human race. That's where we are. And that's why I'm so deeply concerned at the end of my life that I'm going to watch the world explode.
Lawrence Wilkerson, retired Army Colonel and geopolitical analyst, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Zain, for allowing me to come on.
And thank you for tuning in today. If you watch this video to the very end, and if you're watching our videos regularly, make sure to support our journalism. Especially during the summer months, our one-time donations drop drastically, even though our videos get watched tens of thousands of times. We're an independent nonprofit media organization that does not take any money from corporations or governments. We don't even allow advertisement, all with the goal of providing you with information that you just won't hear in the corporate media. Hence, we will be thankful for our donation so we can continue with our critical and independent journalism going forward. I thank you for your support and for tuning in. I'm your host, Zain Raza. See you next time.